Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. On today's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by Marina Gerner to chat about her book, The Vagina Business, the innovative breakthroughs that could change everything in women's health, which is out now and published by Icon Books in the UK. And in the US, it is published by Marina.
By Source Books.
Very good.
And
Marina,
in Germany, it's published by Redline.
wonderful. Thank you. Hannah has done terrible research at that point.
Not at all.
Marina is an award-winning journalist and columnist with over 10 years of experience in writing for national magazines and newspapers, including The Times, The Guardian, Financial Times, and Wall Street Journal, to name a few. She is an adjunct professor at the NYU Stern School of Business and has a PhD from the London School of Economics. Her ideas and research for this book have been awarded grants from the prestigious Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and the Society of Authors. Here to chat about her groundbreaking new book, welcome Marina to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Excited to talk to you.
I'm really excited to have you on. So to start us off, I want to ask my favourite question, which is, what are you currently reading?
I read a lot of fiction as well as reading nonfiction, and I've actually just finished Blue Sisters by Coco Mellers.
It is on my list, and I've still not. It's on my shelf by my bedside, and I've still not got to it. I'm desperate to.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I read it in about a day and a half. No, maybe even a day. It's the story of four sisters. And I don't want to say too much, but it's about unconditional love and addiction and grief. And I think what's really fascinating about this novel is that it feels like a masterclass in characterization.
Yeah.
So it's all about character and character development. And you don't really care about the plot, you just care about the characters.
Which I love. Sometimes you need that in a book.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it does so brilliantly.
I'm really hoping I can get to it before the end of the year. It's just like glaring at me from my shelf. I need to get to that and Private Rights by Julia Armfield. I'm desperate to get to both of those. So hopefully before the year is out, I will have read them, but we shall see.
I'm sure you have lots to read.
Oh, honestly, I really do. I mean, what a wonderful problem to have.
True, yeah.
But let's get into your book, The Vagina Business. When did you initially feel inspired to write The Vagina Business, and why was it important to you to have vagina in the title?
Yeah, those are two brilliant questions. So I'm a journalist and I've been writing about a really broad variety of things. I've spent a long time writing about finance, and then I went freelance in 2018 and I started writing about technology and about health. And so as a freelance journalist, I was invited to attend a conference in London, which was all about health innovation. And I learned something that I think many people still don't know about, which is, if I ask you to imagine a person who's having a heart attack, who do you see?
It's the men that we all see on TV and film, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, it's an old guy. And when you're asked to picture the symptoms, most of us think of pressure on the chest and pain radiating down the left-hand side. Yeah. And so I learned that those symptoms are typical for men, but they're not typical for women. And that was quite shocking to learn. And so as a result of that image that we have, women are 50% more likely than men to be misdiagnosed after having a heart attack. And we know a lot less about heart health issues in women because most of our medical research has focused on the male body. So I was really excited when I came across a company at this conference called Femtech, and I met the founder. She's called Alicia Chong Rodriguez, and what she's created is the coolest thing. It's a smart bra that helps women monitor our heart health. And what inspired me about this bra is that it's such a novel way of thinking about heart health and of creating something that women will want to wear. And it looks quite beautiful as well, but it uses ECG technology at the same time. And it helps women who are at risk monitor their heart health. So I was amazed because I felt there's not just a problem that more people need to know about, but there's also a solution or, part of the solution. And there are people who are actively working on a solution. We're trying to create something that will, first of all, help women who are at risk, but it will also help us fill the gender data gap, because if you can give people a bra that they can wear remotely, then you can collect data that way for clinical trials, and you can enroll more women in clinical trials through that. And so hopefully we can learn more about female heart health that way. So it was a bra that inspired me to get into this topic.
I absolutely love that. And on the subject of having vagina in the title, why was that important to you?
Yeah, it was really important to me for several reasons. The first one is I wanted to echo the Vagina monologues, that play that came out 3 decades ago. That was all about reclaiming the word vagina, and it was all about women talking about their vaginas and telling these really engaging and entertaining stories that others can relate to. And with the vagina business, I wanted for not just women to talk about their vaginas, but for everyone to become more comfortable with hearing that word in a business setting, because it is a body part, but part of what holds women's health back and what holds innovation in that space back is the stigma and the taboo around words like this. So when I was researching women's health, I was interviewing various founders who've created something vagina-centric. And I learned that they really struggle to raise money because venture capital investors don't want to talk about vaginas in a business setting. I have this quote from one VC investor who says, "I don't want to talk about vaginas in my Monday morning partner meeting." And so you can just picture that there's a bunch of guys sitting in a boardroom somewhere and they don't want to talk about vaginas in front of others. And so for that reason, they don't invest in things that help with vaginal tearing in birth or with vaginal dryness in menopause, and you see that that is a huge issue. And so I wrote this article called "We Need to Talk About Investors' Problem with Vaginas." It came out in Wired magazine in 2020, and that article went viral, and it really hit a nerve, and people started messaging me, including founders and investors, and there was this huge response to the article. And I realized, I can build a whole book around this because it's such an important space where we urgently need more innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. You've just put in mind there when we're talking about the investors and them saying that they don't want to be talking about vaginas on their Monday morning meetings. There is a film, I think it's the film A Little Bit of Heaven, and it's got Kate Hudson in it, and it's definitely her, but I can't for sure say that it's that film. But I know she walks into this meeting and she's trying to get them to invest in I think it's like a condom company, and there's somebody else that tries to speak to them and they just kind of bat them off, and then she strolls in and she's like handing out condoms and like strutting around, and she really like owns the space, and they're completely like blown away by her. And I just kept thinking about that scene when I was reading this book and thinking like, is there this expectation from these men that we need to perform in the way that men perform? Like, I'm just kind of trying to understand why these male investors are so kind of reluctant to invest. Is it, where does this fear for them come from? Is it, that it's a woman trying to sell something to them? Is there, bias against the woman, or is it the product itself? What do you think that might be?
I think you've identified it really well. It's a combination of things. So with condoms in particular, it's a male-dominated industry. And so whenever a female founder is pitching something that's not perceived to be gender congruent, she's likely to be facing bias. So women are more likely to raise in fields like fashion or beauty, and then less likely to raise in fields like technology or engineering or condoms. And then there are certain biases that female entrepreneurs face more broadly. So there's a really good study by Professor Dana Kanzer of London Business School. She's looked at the questions that investors tend to ask founders, and she found that investors tend to ask male founders questions that are opportunity focused. So, where do you see yourself and what's your vision, and questions like that. Whereas when they speak to male founders, they tend to ask preventative questions. So questions around what's your competition? What happens if somebody, games your game,
Mm-hmm.
questions like that. So there are certain biases that female founders face more broadly,
Yeah.
and other additional biases that Femtech founders face, who often work in very stigmatized areas. So whether that's condoms or fertility products or, things around endometriosis or urinary incontinence. So sometimes it's a matter of embarrassment. And then other times, I think there's a reluctance to invest in something that they feel they don't understand,
Yeah.
or they feel they don't have firsthand knowledge of. But the reality is that lots of people invest in space or cryptocurrency, and it's not like they're all astronauts.
No,
and it's not like they're all creators of the blockchain. So, if you want to invest something, you need to do the research and you look at the business case for it. So I think oftentimes it's also an excuse to say, well, I'm not a woman, I can't possibly invest in any of these products.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And I found it mind-blowing how many times in the book, you'd be speaking about these male investors and they'd be like, oh, well, my wife might need this, and it'd be something like completely irrelevant that they definitely don't need. But then when the stuff that would actually help us, they'd be like, oh no, like we're not kind of interested in that. And you're just like, you have no lived experience. So what do you mean? Like, who are you to say that that wouldn't work for us or that wouldn't apply to us? And you're so right in that, they're willing to invest in stuff that they don't have any experience in, but they think is needed versus stuff that is actually needed. I'm wording that terribly, but it is just such a mind-blowing thing.
Yeah, yeah. And even the ones, and I know they mean well,
Yeah,
even the ones who say, let me go and ask my wife, you wouldn't say, let me go and ask an astronaut if you're investing in space. You wouldn't ask
exactly.
one person. You would just never make a business decision based on one person.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't. I want to talk about the word femtech, the phrase femtech, I should say.
Yeah, yeah.
So for people that haven't read your book yet, could you explain what femtech means and where this term came from?
Absolutely. So, first of all, I think it's important to say when you say femtech, a lot of people hear fintech. So they hear financial technology and
And
they
it's
think
not
you're talking,
that.
no, they think you're talking about online banking.
That's not what we're talking about here.
That's not it. That's not it. And then other people assume that when you say femtech, you're referring to companies that are led by women, any company. But that's also not the case here. So femtech is a term that stands for female technology, and it was coined in 2016 by Ida Tin, who's the founder of Clue, the period app. And she created this term for investors actually to bring together a whole category of products that are technology that's focused on female bodies. So everything from periods to fertility, menopause, and also going beyond the uterus. Because I think when we talk about women's health, it's important to remember that it's not just about reproductive health.
Yeah.
There's one definition of women's health which says it refers to issues that affect us solely, like periods, differently, like heart health, or disproportionately, like bone health.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, the more you look into women's health, you realize there's very little that's actually gender neutral. So we could look at all areas of health and, find the sex-specific things that are in them. So that's one thing to say. And the term femtech, the way I define it is that it's consumer-focused and oftentimes digitally enabled. And I think it's also really important that it's an impact-driven term. Mm-hmm. So for me, femtech needs to take women's health forward. It needs to make a positive contribution. Otherwise, it's not femtech, but it's scamtech or something else. Whereas I've heard other people use the term femtech for, anything from hair removal products to beauty products to breast enlargement and leggings and all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. To me, that doesn't qualify as femtech.
Yes.
So it has to be technology, it's focused on female bodies, and that helps us move women's health forward in some way.
Yeah, and I want to ask actually about this like scam tech that you write in the book, because actually that was one of my favorite sections in the book and I found it so fascinating. Specifically things like intimate wash, which we know vaginas are self-cleaning, like you don't require those things, but it's kind of pushed on us. And I think some of these products that are pushed out and pushed upon us to kind of feed off our insecurities. How do we differentiate between what is scam tech and what is femtech?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I have certain questions that people can ask themselves
Hmm.
so that we find the chapter.
Yes.
I think the example you gave is actually really good in terms of intimate wash. So one question you can ask yourself is, does it make you feel dirty? You know, if the product makes you feel dirty and it makes you feel like there's something you need to change, something you need to clean, you know, it's worth paying attention to what that product actually does. It's also good to ask yourself how the company makes money. You know, what exactly is it selling? What are the risks? What is the current evidence? And if they put academic journal articles onto their website, for example, what journal was it published in? You know, is it peer reviewed? Because there are companies that will say they are evidence-based without providing any evidence.
Yeah.
So just saying that you're based on evidence doesn't mean you are. And there's a lot of misinformation. There are lots of online websites, for instance, that help, that say that they can help people reverse PCOS in natural ways. There are lots of supplements that claim to do things they don't actually do. I've seen quite a lot on Instagram recently that promises women to improve their egg quality through lifestyle changes or diet changes. You can't actually do that because the main factor that determines the quality of your eggs is your age. And so I'm sure having a good diet is beneficial.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence to say that it can impact your egg quality in any way. And there are supplements that claim to do that too. And then we also have a category of products that I've been thinking about recently that I haven't covered in the book, but I think of them as pink rebrand products.
Yeah.
Products that take something that already exists and then they repackage it for women in the health space and sell it to women saying, look, this is for your period pain. So there's Feminax, for example, which is sold to help women with period pain, but it's just repackaged ibuprofen. And then you also have TENS machines that have been repackaged to be sold for women as period pain relief. And the question is, how much do these companies charge for something that you could also buy on Amazon as a generic product? Yeah. If you can buy ibuprofen for £1 and Feminax costs £6,
yes,
then
but it's the same thing.
It is the same thing, but women or certain people may not know that they can use a TENS machine, for instance, for period pain. And if there's a company that puts a product out and it says you can use this machine to help with your period pain, then it might fill the gap in that it creates more awareness.
Yeah.
But if you could also go on Amazon and buy the same thing for a quarter of the price, then that is a new form of pink tax, I would say.
The pink tax really took me by surprise in the book because I obviously knew about I say obviously, it's not, I don't feel like it's actually an obvious thing. And I think like the marketing can sometimes be very in your face while simultaneously being very subtle. So it's unless you know what you're looking for, it's hard to be caught out by that. And I think because we're so used to the kind of colors of like pink is for women and blue is for men, like it's just it's kind of like it's a trap that you fall into without meaning to. And I knew about the kind of men versus women's razors. It's a conversation that I think a lot of people pass on to each other. But I don't think I'd fully absorbed like the scale of which this kind of pink tax is at play. It is just really mind-blowing, I think.
It is. When you think about haircuts or rain jackets.
Yeah.
So many of these things have a pink tax attached.
Yeah, it is actually crazy. And I wanted to dive into women's fertility because I really loved the way that you wrote about that. And I think it's important for people to be careful around the messaging they take in around fertility. I very much have fell for it in recent years, where I'm nearing 30 now. I'm going to be 30 in January, and the fear has started to kick in because I feel like socially, maybe, we're told that once you hit a certain point, you need to be quick if you want children. Like, you need to be quick.
Mhm.
There's a ticking time bomb, and that is what I don't know where this messaging has come from. But I loved that you wrote that you feel women's fertility is more about a slope after 35 rather than just instantly going off the edge of a cliff. Where do you think this misinformation or fear stems from?
So I would say it's actually a slope after your mid 20s.
Right.
Fertility, so it's not misinformation. Fertility definitely does go down.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, peak fertility, I think if I remember correctly, is at around 20 or in your mid 20s, and then it goes down. But I think it's good to say it's not a cliff, it is a slope, because there
It's
are
not as
so many.
drastic as we're made to believe.
It still is quite drastic, and
Oh, okay.
it does decrease further after 35. But if you look at a graph of how it decreases, it doesn't fall off a cliff.
Yeah.
It goes down. I think it's still important to know that it does go down more drastically after 35.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have lots of individual variation.
Yeah.
So for some women, it's, not going to be an issue having kids in their late 30s, but statistically, it's more likely to be an issue. So, yeah.
I was hoping you'd be like, no, Hannah, you're fine.
No, unfortunately, that is the case. Yeah. And I feel like it's important to say that, because there are so many Instagram accounts out there claiming to help you, improve your fertility or improve your egg quality, when in reality, that's not actually possible right now. We haven't found a way to extend our fertility in that way. Maybe in 10 years' time, there'll be a drug or something revolutionary to, completely change the way that slope goes. But I think right now it's still the case that
I clearly totally misread that to find some kind of confirmation for myself. She's very hopeful. I want to ask actually about period apps, because I am a user of a period app, and I was intrigued by your research on this, because I think you wrote, and now I'm second guessing myself because of what I assumed before, that only
No.
that only 13% of women have a 28-day cycle. That's 13%. And what these apps kind of push out about what is normal versus what is abnormal in our cycles. What do you feel that we can be mindful about when using apps like this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's mind-blowing to think that, if you go and look at a textbook and you look at how the menstrual cycle is typically represented, it will always have 28 days.
Yeah.
And I remember growing up thinking, okay, 28 days is normal. So my cycle is not normal.
It's not normal, yeah.
It's on the longer side, when in reality, only 13% of women have a 28-day cycle. And the average cycle is actually a bit longer. It's 29 point something. And of course, there's a lot of variation as well. When you look at period apps, at this point in time, I think there are over 300 different period apps. And there are real quality differences between them, because you have companies like Clue that have put a lot of thought into, how people track their periods and into their privacy policies and so on. Whereas other companies haven't put much thought into it at all. And they've just, they've released a number of games, and then they've decided, okay, we might as well release a period app because there's another place we can put adverts on. And so I would say it's always good to Google whatever app you're considering and see what other people have said about it, and whether they've been caught up in any scandals recently. And then it's worth looking at what their policies are, how they collect your data. And so the better apps know that our cycle is not always 28 days long, and they actually adjust to your cycle. But it really depends on what app you're getting.
Yeah. I remember going to the GP because my app had said that my cycle was abnormal because it had gone over, I think it was like 42 days or something. and it started to say it was abnormal.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't consistently that, it changed every month, but it was between 35 and 42 days at this point, and the longest it had gone was 42 days. And I went in with the app and I said, look, it says this, like, what's wrong? Like, do I need to be concerned? And she was like, no. She said, if it's consistently longer than usual, that's when
Mm-hmm.
you should come and have a checkup and see if everything's okay. But just because it tells you that doesn't mean that something is necessarily wrong, because there are a lot of factors that kind of play into that. And I think, that's reassuring to remember, is that it's things like travel, it's things like stress, there's various elements that can actually make your cycle longer, which is always,
Exactly.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's reassuring to remember.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if it's a one-off.
Yeah.
It could have been all sorts of things. But I think it's really good that you went in and that you asked about it.
Mm.
And maybe, it's maybe it gave you peace of mind just knowing that everything was okay. And if you hadn't used the app, maybe you wouldn't have thought to ask the question.
Exactly. But I think you read the word abnormal and
Mm,
immediately alarm bells start going
yeah.
off.
Yeah, if that's the word they used, then yeah, that's not great.
No, well, not the apps,
The
said
app. Yes,
abnormal,
yes,
yeah, which
yes.
which really threw me.
Mhm.
But the GP did say that it's helpful to track your cycle. Don't always take everything as
Yes,
gospel that the app tells you, but it is
yes.
handy to know what your cycle is and what symptoms you get around your cycle. Like, it's always good to know that information.
Exactly. I think whichever app you're using, it's always, if there's something concerning on it, it's always good to ask your GP.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think they also appreciate people collecting that information because
Hmm.
then you can go to your appointment and you can say, look, this is what's been happening.
Yeah.
And in the past, it was less convenient to track your dates and your symptoms and so on. And I've met lots of women who collect that data because they've noticed that something is off, or they want to have a particular conversation with their doctor, and so they collect data around their symptoms meticulously to then build a case and say, okay, look, can you explain what's been happening?
Yeah.
So I think apps can be really helpful for that.
Oh, for sure, for sure. There is actually so much that I could pick out of this book to talk about, but I want to ask a more kind of general question, which is about the research process into this book. And I was curious, were there any particular people that you interviewed, or products you came across that you felt particularly inspired by? Yeah, I'd love you to talk through those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've interviewed about 100 people,
Wow.
and every person I've chosen has inspired me in some way because when I was researching the space, I've spoken, I've met hundreds, probably close to 1,000 people at all these different conferences and industry events. So whenever I actually asked to interview someone, I had already done a lot of research on them, and there was something in their work that drew me to what they were
Hmm.
doing. And when I started this research, I was in my early 30s. And as we've just discussed, fertility is a slope. So I knew I wanted to have children
Yeah,
soon-ish. And I also knew that 9 in 10 first-time mothers experience a birth injury,
yeah.
unfortunately. And there are different schools of thought on this, but some women will say, oh, don't tell her anything about it. You don't want to put her off. Whereas I think knowledge is power, and I think it's good to
100%.
know about these things so that you know your options and you can try and prevent some of these
Hmm.
things. So I was really excited to discover a company called Materna Medical in California. They've created a birth dilator, which is not on the market yet. It's still in clinical trials right now. And we'll see whether it will make it to the market. But the idea is to pre-stretch the vaginal canal so that in the first stage of labor, so that by the time the baby comes out, those muscles are already pre-stretched, just like you would
Yes.
stretch your muscles before you're working out. And then hopefully that would minimize tearing, and it could help us prevent pelvic organ prolapse later down the line as well. And I thought that was such a great idea. And I
Honestly,
spoke to
I've
friends,
I've not
right?
stopped thinking about that. And I went for a coffee with my friend the other day, and she's due with her baby next week. And I was just so blown away by it. I was like, let me tell you about this product. I was like, it's not out in the world yet, but I really hope at one point it will be.
Right? It makes so
Incredible.
much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. It just makes complete sense. And I spoke to Tracy McNeil, the CEO, and she told me that the last big innovation in the standard of care of birth was the epidural, which was popularized in the 1950s.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, it just completely blew my mind because there's no other area of society or technology where we wheel out the technology that was popularized in the 1950s and we say,
Exactly.
hey, look at this cutting edge floppy disk. But it just doesn't happen. But in birth, it does because if you are to give birth, tomorrow or like your friend in a week, then the epidural is one of those options that's considered one of the best. And so, and the epidural, it is popular, but I think there's a lot more that can be done and a lot more that can be created in that space.
100%. Yeah, there really is. I have a little quote here that I would like to read out from the book, if you wouldn't mind.
Of
Um,
course.
you wrote, if we continue to avoid talking about female bodies by shrouding them in mystery, we rob women of pleasure and inflict them with pain. Now, I don't know if this has come from you directly or whether you quoted somebody, but I just absolutely love that quote.
Thank you. That's my quote.
That's your quote. Okay, let's get it on a wall somewhere. I absolutely loved that, and I think it summarizes it perfectly. Yeah, I've been wanting to articulate something for a long time, and I think that does just that. And the kind of message in the book for me, it did feel, whilst it's very clear that there's still a long way to go, as you've just said, the last major kind of innovation is, it was the epidural in the 1950s, in terms of labor and birth and all that kind of stuff, which is mind blowing. But it made me really hopeful. This book made me really hopeful in terms of the change that is happening and the women that are making this change happen and the innovation that is happening. It's all really positive and hopeful things. What do you want readers to take away from this book, or what do you hope that they'll take away from this book? And I also wanted to ask, how can women not working in these fields, or how can anybody not working in these fields, because it's not just on women, help advocate for this change?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think, okay, so
It's a lot. It's a lot.
I know, and I love that you picked that quote because I think that was also, when you're having one of those moments where
Yeah.
you just have an insight into how things are happening in the world, and when you're writing something, I think it's always very special and very magical to have those moments where you're like, okay, I can see how things are connected here, and I can see what needs to be done to change that. And I think articulating that thought was very important. So I'm really grateful.
No,
And I'm
you
glad.
articulated it beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. So I'm hoping that when people read these books, I'm hoping that they learn a lot about their own bodies because that's what's happened to me when I was doing this research. You think you know about your body, but in reality, there's just so much more to learn. And I've learned a huge amount. And I think it's really helped me advocate for myself as well when I was pregnant and when I was giving birth, for example. And I want to give people the tools to talk about those things and the insights to know what's happening, because you can't really address a problem or find a solution if you don't even know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So it starts with education, right? And knowing more about your body. And also knowing that I think it's time for us to stop accepting things as they are. And it's time to stop the normalization of female pain. So this whole attitude of welcome to being a woman and, this is going to hurt, or it's all in your head, or are you having a lot of stress right now? Or maybe you just need to lose a bit of weight, or all of these things that are being said to women in the context of health are simply no longer acceptable. Just like saying, oh, extreme period pain is normal. That's just period pain. Or painful IUD insertions. Oh, well, that's just normal. It's just going to hurt. Or pain with breastfeeding. Oh, well, it takes a few weeks. That just shouldn't be our attitude.
No.
And oftentimes it still is, but I think it is changing slowly. And if you're looking at all of these incredible entrepreneurs and researchers who are really coming up with products and services and nonprofits that can improve our health, and that can just make things so much more, enjoyable in different life stages. I think it makes you realize, okay, there's a different way.
Yeah.
We can look at all of these different stages in our life, whether that's, your menstrual cycle, or whether that's being pregnant or going through menopause. We can look at all of that in a much more positive way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marina, for writing this book. And I can't even imagine how much research went into this. You have almost 100 pages of references and notes, and it is just so thoroughly detailed and researched. And I'm just really grateful that you've put this book out into the world and that I've got to read it, because I really feel like I've learned so much, and that this knowledge is so important for all women. We need to know these things, and I'm just really grateful to you for doing that. So yeah, thank you.
That's so kind of you. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
I'm so honored, and I'm so pleased. And yeah, as you say, there are lots of sources at the back. So
yes,
that was, to help people find the articles and the academic journals in case they want to do more research onto anything in particular. They can always go back to the source.
There is so much in there for us to do our research, so we can no longer say that we don't understand these things, because you've put it all there for us. So if it wasn't already obvious, I absolutely love this book, and I loved it so much. The Vagina Business is out now in the UK. It is also out in the US and Germany as well. Did you say?
That's right, Germany and Switzerland and Austria.
Wonderful. Well, I'll be popping some links in the show notes for listeners to order themselves a copy. Before I let you go, Marina, I would love to finish on a recommendation. So what would you like to recommend? It can be books, TV, film, podcasts, anything goes for this one.
Yeah, this may be an obvious one, but I think I'd recommend Invisible Women.
Yes, I've still not read that, so that's a great one.
Yeah, that's a great one for those who want to understand the different gender data gaps that exist in society, whether that's around how our cities are designed, to how our cars are tested, and so on, to really understand the male default and how female bodies have been ignored. And the Vagina Business has been called the answer to Invisible Women, because Invisible Women raises lots of these questions and shows us lots of these gaps. And I was trying to at least provide us with some of the solution and some of the ways in which we can move forward.
Yeah, and you definitely do. I'm really excited to read that book, and I'm probably reading it the wrong way around now, because I've got my answers. You've given us so much food for thought with your book, and I'm sure there'll be even more with Invisible Women as well for me to get to. But I'm really grateful that, you have raised quite some questions in this book about, why are these things not happening? But there is also a lot about the change that is to come, and hopefully we'll start seeing some of that. So
absolutely. Yeah.
But thank you so much, Marina, and thank you for coming on A Pair of Bookends.
It's been an absolute pleasure and so much fun talking to you. And thank you for all your thoughtful questions and comments.
Thank you. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe. You can go and buy The Vagina Business via the link in our show notes or in your local bookshops. Where can the listeners follow you on social media? Or if you've got a website, Marina, where can they find you?
Yeah, I have a Substack. So
amazing.
I write a newsletter about women's health. And you can also find me on Instagram as Marina Gerner, and on LinkedIn as well, if that's your cup of tea.
Wonderful. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And you can also find us for exclusive content over on Patreon. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.